You clock into the sushi restaurant. You're the best chef this side of the equator. Most of your customers are great. They tip very well and thank you for your delicious sushi. But one customer who stands at an absurd 6'9" and easily 250 pounds always bullies you and reaches into your tip jar and takes out all of the bills, leaving you with just the change. This angers you, but you know he would destroy you if you stand up for yourself. Not only that, but he knows that your dream is to create your own original sushi. He laughs and says he would rather eat a fish raw from the river than eat your sushi. So in order to learn how to fight properly, you join the MMA gym after your shift at work. It's much easier than you thought. So you sign up for some regional fights, and fast forward 8 years, and you're a star in the UFC and own your own sushi restaurant. You are Deiveson God of War Figueiredo, also known as Figgy, and this is the Casual's Guide to Deiveson Figueiredo versus Marlon Vera. Starting the Casual's Guide, we will look at the career of Marlon Vera. Chito was born and raised in Chon, Ecuador. He is in his physical prime, being 31 years old, and he stands at 5 foot and 8 inches tall. Chito had no amateur fights, making his first MMA fight a professional one, and in 2010, Chito made his professional debut against Romel Orozco. Chito would come out victorious by getting an armbar and forcing the tap. In July 2011, Chito would fight in Extreme FC against Cesar Moreno, and this would be a tougher fight than his last. However, Chito did win by unanimous decision. In February of 2012, Chito would make his third walk into the octagon against Jack Guzman. Chito's momentum would not stop there because he would get a triangle choke finish. Chito was on a 3-fight win streak, riding high. Chito would fight once more in 2012 against Alexis Patino. In this fight, Chito would achieve his third submission victory by sinking in another armbar. Chito would take the rest of the year off and eventually fight Javier Munoz. And in the second round, Chito would get another triangle choke finish. Chito was known as a submission artist at this time, a much different perspective to how the fans would label him today. In April of 2013, Chito would face off with Joel Iglesias in the 300 Spartan promotion. This would be a spectacular performance because Chito would knock out Joel with a devastating elbow just 4 minutes into the first round. Chito would sign a 3-fight deal in Inca FC, and he would make his debut in Inca against Luis Herrera a month after his last fight. And once again, Chito would sink in a rear naked choke and force the tap just 1 minute into the first round. After back-to-back first-round finishes, Chito would fight Fabio Bispo, but this fight would not go the way he wanted, and it would get chalked down as a draw. Chito would take 2 months off to recover, and would fight again in August against Bruno Leandro. But Chito's tough luck didn't end there. Chito would have an extremely tough fight, and ended up losing a unanimous decision. In his 5th fight of 2013, Chito would go up against Juan Owens. Chito would show up and show out by sinking in a heel hook, forcing the tap. With Chito getting known in the regional scene, it would catch the attention of the UFC, and in November of 2014, Chito would make his UFC debut against Marco Beltran. This would turn out to be a tougher fight than he anticipated because he would lose to Beltran by unanimous decision. Chito would take nearly a year off, fighting again in August of 2015 against Roman Salazar, but Chito would beat the brakes off of Roman before getting the fight on the ground and sinking in a nasty triangle armbar and getting the tap. After getting his first win in the promotion, Chito would fight a name known to the hardcore fans, Dangerous Davey Grant. But as some of you know, Davey Grant is a tough fight for anybody, and this would be a razor close fight, but Davey pulled away at the end of the rounds, therefore scoring a unanimous decision victory over Chito. He now had 1 win and 2 losses in his first 3 fights in the UFC. Things were looking bleak, but Chito would get another opportunity to prove himself. In November of 2016, Cheeto would fight Guang Yu Ning, and Cheeto would get right back in the win column, getting the unanimous decision victory. Cheeto was confident once again, and in March of 2017, Cheeto would fight Brad Pickett, and he would show the UFC audience that he had knockout power. He would land a nasty head kick and landed a brutal follow-up ground and pound strikes. After the TKO victory, Cheeto was gaining momentum, and in July of 2017, Cheeto would fight Brian Callagher and would once again land a very tight armbar and get the tap in just 1 round 2 minutes in. Cheeto now had 3 wins in a row, and he was looking unstoppable, so they would give him a jump up in competition, fighting Hands of Stone John Lineker. Cheeto would prove to everybody how durable he was in this fight, but would end up losing in a unanimous decision. Cheeto was in a tough spot, but far from giving up. Cheeto would fight again in February of 2018 against Douglas Da Silva, but Da Silva is a tough fight, well-rounded veteran, and Cheeto would get shown that, losing by unanimous decision. After losing back-to-back times, for the first time in his career, he was doubting himself, but he knew he could not give up. And in August of 2018, he would go up against Leheburen Wu, and Cheeto would take out his frustration on Wu with a nasty body shot, crumpling Wu onto the canvas and getting the knockout win once again. Cheeto would waste no time to fight again. In November of 2018, he would fight Guido Canetti, and Cheeto would get the finish again, getting the finish by rear naked choke. Regaining momentum, Cheeto would get back in the lab and sharpen his tools, and would fight again in March of 2019 against another veteran, Frankie Sinez. Again, Cheeto would end the fight in spectacular fashion by knockout in the very first round, just 1 minute in. Cheeto would waste no time at getting another opponent, and in July of 2019, he would face off against Nolan Hernandez, once again getting a nasty submission win by getting the rear naked choke finish. After getting all of the momentum on his side, Cheeto would fight Andre Ewell. This is another tough fight, but Cheeto would land a nasty elbow, getting the ref to step in and would get the technical knockout finish in the 3rd round. Cheeto was riding high, finishing his last 4 fights, and he would get the push once again into the rankings, and he would fight a fan favorite and prospect, Song Yadong. But Song showed better hands and better volume, beating Cheeto by unanimous decision. This was a tough loss for Cheeto, but there was a huge name chirping in the shadows, and would be a career-changing fight if you were to beat him. That man was Sean O'Malley. After talking trash for well over a year, Sean vs. Cheeto would happen in May of 2020, and Cheeto would shock the fans by landing a nasty leg kick, sending Sean to the canvas, and landing brutal ground and pound, forcing the ref to step in. This was massive for Cheeto because he had a huge jump in fans, and the promotion would push him once again. After disposing of O'Malley, Cheeto would fight Jose Aldo, a former champion and Hall of Famer. Unfortunately, Cheeto would lose this fight by unanimous decision. It was unfortunate, but not a career ender. Cheeto would take a few months off after this loss, and he would fight again in June of 2021 in a rematch against another prospect, Dangerous Davey Grant. But Cheeto would redeem himself by outclassing Grant, winning by unanimous decision. After getting back into the win column, Cheeto would fight another former champion and Hall of Famer, Frankie Edgar. This fight would end by Cheeto landing a very nasty, pinpoint accurate front kick to the face, sending Frankie to the canvas face down. This knockout got millions of views, and fans still talk about it over 3 years later. In April of 2022, Cheeto would fight another prospect on the rise. That prospect was Rob Font. This would be the first fight for Cheeto that went all 5 rounds, but he would end up stealing the round time after time by landing a huge shot, hurting Font in the last minute of the rounds. This was a very tough fight, but a win nonetheless. A few months after getting that win, he would face off with another Hall of Fame fighter, pioneer, and former champion, Dominic Cruz. This fight was in August, and this would end in another fantastic knockout that went absolutely viral by landing a pinpoint accurate head kick, shattering Dominic's nose. After that vicious knockout that went viral, Cheeto would fight the dark horse of the bantamweight division, Corey Sandhagen. This was a tough fight for Cheeto. Cheeto would land a few hard shots, but it was pretty dominant. Corey would land a ton of huge shots as well as winning the grappling exchanges, which should have been a unanimous decision for Sandhagen, but one judge thought Cheeto won, so it went down as a split decision. People felt Cheeto got exposed, but that was a premature narrative, so in August of 2023, Cheeto would face off with another veteran, Pedro Munoz. This would be on the main card underneath the O'Malley vs. Sterling card, and if Cheeto would beat Pedro, he would be in line for a fight with O'Malley once more. But Pedro was a tough fight, and Cheeto proved to be more than good enough to get the win. It wasn't a viral knockout, but he would win in a unanimous decision. This was a big win over Munoz, and O'Malley beating Sterling for the belt. This was a perfect opportunity for a rematch and title shot, and the UFC did just that because in March of 2024, Cheeto vs. O'Malley 2 would happen. Cheeto was extremely confident having beat O'Malley a few years previously, and O'Malley feeling like it was just a fluke due to the calf kick hitting the peroneal nerve, which gave you a condition called dead foot. Basically, you can't control your foot. In the fight with O'Malley, it was a very tough fight, and Cheeto would end up losing in a devastating fashion. Sure, he didn't get finished, but he would lose by unanimous decision, and now he is fighting yet another former champion and extremely tough fighter, Deiveson Figueiredo. Overall, Cheeto's record stands at 23 wins and 9 losses with 1 draw. Cheeto has 8 knockout wins, 10 submission wins, and 5 decision wins, with all 9 of his losses being by decision, meaning Cheeto has never been knocked out. He has never been submitted. With 33 fights under his belt, it's pretty crazy that he has never been finished. Now it is finally time to take a look at the career of a former champion and most likely a future Hall of Famer, the God of War, Deiveson Figueiredo. We will call him Figgy, as that's what the media and the fans call him. Figgy is in the latter part of his career, being 36 years old. He stands 5'5" and was raised in Sucre, Brazil. Figgy never fought in the amateurs, therefore he went right into the pros. Figgy made his professional debut back in February of 2012 against Deiveson Figueiredo, and he would get the job done in no time, getting a beautiful armbar finish just 3 minutes into the first round. Figgy's second fight was in August of 2012 against Jonas Figueiredo, and once again, he wasted no time in getting the knockout 2 minutes into the first round. Figgy would take a year off and focus on sharpening his craft, making his third fight in March of 2014 against David Silva. But there was no ring rust because Figgy would sink in a guillotine and get the tap just 53 seconds into the first round. At this point, Figgy has never seen the second round and finished every fight he has ever been in. In May of 2014, Figgy would fight Deiveson Figueiredo. This fight would not be like the others because this fight would go all 3 rounds, but Figgy would get the unanimous decision victory. Figgy's confidence was unmatched after showing the fans he could go all 3 rounds and in dominant fashion. So in July of 2014, he would fight Evaldo Jr. He would end up sinking in another guillotine choke and getting the submission victory in just 4 minutes into the first round. After getting back to his finishing ways, Figgy would fight once again against Joel Silva. Figgy would knock out Silva just 3 minutes into the first round, and he wasted no time getting back in there in November of 2014. Figgy would face off against Joel Silva. Figgy would again get a first round knockout and continue his insane streak of first round finishes. Just a month later, Figgy would make the walk again against Rainer Silva. This fight wouldn't be another first round finish, but he would get the knockout in the second round just 3 minutes in. After winning 6 fights in 2014 and signing a 3-fight deal with Jungle Fight, he he would take off 2015 to enjoy the fruits of his labor and make some sushi. And in May of 2016, he would fight again against Antonio Miranda. This fight would not go the way his last one did, but he would sink in a guillotine choke, forcing the tap and getting the win 2 minutes into the first round. Figgy would fight again in September of 2016 against Dennis Araujo. This would end in the second round after a flurry of devastating punches. To finish off the year, Figgy would make the walk again against Ricardo da Silva. In just 1 minute of the first round, he would sink in an arm triangle and get the victory. His insane win streak and finishing fights in the first round would not go unnoticed, because Figgy would finally get the call from the UFC in 2017. At this point, Figgy was on fire. He was 11-0 with 10 finishes on his record. So in June of 2017, Figgy would make his UFC debut against Marco Beltran, a former opponent of Cheetos. But Figgy would brutalize Beltran to the point where his corner would step in and force the fight to stop in between rounds 2 and 3. After making his statement in his debut, and that his nickname is the God of War, and for good reason, Figgy would waste no time in coming back fighting again in October 2017 against Jared Brooks. This would be his closest fight at the time, but he would still get the nod from the judges, getting the win by split decision. Figgy would stay active fighting in the beginning of 2018, fighting Joseph Morales. Figgy would stay undefeated when he knocked out Morales in the second round 4 minutes in. Figgy was still on a roll and undefeated. Figgy would fight half a year later, taking on John Moraga. Figgy would once again finish Moraga in the second round just 3 minutes into the fight. Figgy was riding high and building up a fan base by getting knockouts and finishes in a division where it's pretty rare to get that many. So they would put him up against a tougher fighter, Jacir Formiga. This would be an extremely tough fight and really test Figgy, but Figgy, for the first time in his career, would lose. His beautiful undefeated record has been broken, but he was high up in the rankings and had a good fan base, so the UFC gave him another tough matchup, and in July of 2019, Figgy would match up against current champion Alexandre Pantoja. This was a tough, grimy fight, but Figgy would reign supreme once again, beating Pantoja by unanimous decision, proving he could beat the top-level flyweights. So the UFC would match him up with a very tough fight in crafty veteran Tim Elliott. But Figgy proved to be too good for Tim by sinking in a very tight guillotine choke and getting the tap just 3 minutes into round 1. At this point, the fans were buzzing and Figgy's confidence was higher than ever. So he would get his very first title shot for the vacant belt, and he would fight Joseph Benavidez for that belt. This was a very hard fight on paper, but Figgy would prove otherwise, knocking out Benavidez in the second round just 1 minute in. Figgy has done it. He is champion. He would defend his belt for the first time in a rematch against Benavidez, but this would go even better for Figgy, choking out Benavidez in the very first round by rear naked choke, just 4 minutes into the first round. Figgy looked unstoppable. He had power in his hands and a nasty ground game. So the UFC would put him up against another tough fighter, Alex Perez. But Figgy's momentum would not stop here, because just 2 minutes into the first round, he would sync up another nasty guillotine choke and get the tap. But there was a killer waiting in the shadows and making waves of his own, Brandon Moreno. This fight would happen in December of 2020, and it is highly regarded as the best flyweight fight of all time. Both fighters got hurt bad and went back and forth on the ground, ending in a draw. This meant Figgy kept his belt, but there was a new rivalry. So in June of 2021, they would do the rematch. Unfortunately, this fight would not go Figgy's way, because Moreno ended up getting a very tight choke in on Figgy and getting the tap. Figgy has lost his belt, but he was an extremely dominant champion, so the UFC gave him an immediate rematch and see if the second fight was a fluke. So they would have their third fight in January of 2022. This was another razor close fight, but Figgy came out victorious, getting his belt back and making the fans think the second fight was indeed a fluke. It was a bad night in the office, but there wasn't any other flyweights worthy of a title shot. so they would make a fourth fight between the two fighters, making it the very first quadrilogy in the UFC. And their historical fight would happen in January of 2023, almost a year later. Unfortunately, the heavyweight cut would be tough on Figgy, making his body weakened, and he would forced to stop fighting when the doctor stepped in. Figgy had lost the historical rematch and decided to move up to bantamweight. He would fight again at the end of 2023 against Rob Font, another opponent that Cheeto has also fought. Figgy's movement and weight turned out to be smart because he would beat Font by unanimous decision. Figgy was back in the win column with a hardcore fan base, a rarity for the flyweight fighters. With his status in the promotion not going unnoticed, the UFC would offer him a spot on a historical card, UFC 300, and his opponent would be Cody No Love Garbrandt. This was a tough fight in the first round, but Figgy would end up getting it to the ground and forcing a rear naked choke and getting the tap. And that brings us to this weekend. Deiveson Figueiredo versus Marlon Cheeto Vera is going to be amazing, and the winner might fight for the belt with another win after. Figgy's record stands at 23 wins, 3 losses, and 1 draw. He has 9 knockout wins, 9 submission wins, and 5 decision wins. He has been technically knocked out 1 time in the doctor stoppage, submitted 1 time, and lost 1 decision. It's no question that Figgy has had a legendary career and has changed his life around. Overall, this fight is a tough one to pick because Cheeto has a knack for landing giant shots in the last minute of the round, therefore stealing the round. But if Figgy can mix it up and get the fight on the ground, then his odds of winning skyrocket. Right now I can't confidently pick a fighter, but for the sake of the video, I'll pick Figgy by decision. Who do you guys have winning this great fight? If you've watched the video this far, be sure to like and subscribe, as that is the only way to support the channel. I hope you enjoyed the video and have a great time watching the fights. Bye.